It was a gloomy winter afternoon. The sky seemed to press down on the earth, with thick, dark clouds gathering on the horizon. The wind blew fiercely, whipping through the trees along the deserted road, and the impending storm announced its arrival with lightning cutting through the sky, followed by deafening thunder. Raindrops began to fall slowly, gaining strength until they turned into a downpour. There were no signs of life in that forgotten corner of the world. Only the sound of nature's fury filled the air, bringing with it a sense of loneliness and abandonment. In the middle of this desolate road, something small and fragile moved, almost imperceptible from a distance. At first glance, it looked like a pile of leaves or debris swept along by the wind, but as one got closer, it became clear what was really there. It was a cat, huddled, soaked to the bone, trembling from the cold and fear. Its paws were covered in mud, and its frail body seemed unable to withstand the storm's power. Abandoned, with no one to protect it, it was just another helpless creature at the mercy of nature's wrath. The little feline, whose fur was once white, was now unrecognizable, dirty and covered in mud. Its large, expressive eyes were half closed, as if it had given up fighting the inevitable. The world around it seemed to have forgotten it, and everything pointed to that night being its last. But life has strange ways of surprising us, even in the darkest moments. The cat was not entirely alone on that road. A few meters ahead, a car was slowly making its way through the storm. Behind the wheel was Eulalia, a woman in her early 50s, returning from visiting her sick mother in a nearby town. Eulalia had always been sensitive to life signs, and that afternoon, as she drove through the storm, something inside her urged her to slow down. Her heart tightened, and for a moment, she felt an inexplicable connection to something she had yet to see. In the distance, Eulalia noticed the small, motionless figure by the side of the road. Her instincts told her that this wasn't just a random object. As she got closer, her heart began to race. Could it be? She murmured to herself, unable to finish the thought. She pulled over, feeling the weight of the decision she was about to make. The rain pounded hard against the windshield, making it difficult to see, but Eulalia knew she couldn't just drive past. Something deep within her, told her there was a life that needed her help. She stepped out of the car, braving the wind and rain that lashed against her body. Each step toward that small being felt like a challenge, but Eulalia didn't hesitate. When she finally got close enough, she saw a sight that would break anyone's heart: a small cat, so helpless, fighting to survive the storm. Without a second thought, Eulalia knelt in the mud, completely ignoring the discomfort. With careful hands, she lifted the trembling little body. The cat could barely open its eyes, and its body felt as cold as ice. Eulalia wrapped it in her coat, holding it close to her chest, trying to share some warmth. "You're going to be okay, I promise," she whispered, as if her voice could somehow reach the heart of that tiny creature. And so, in the midst of the storm's fury, Eulalia made a silent promise. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew that this encounter wasn't by chance. At that moment, a journey of hope and survival had begun, and neither of them would ever be the same after that night. The rain continued to batter Eulalia's car as she carefully drove through the dark roads. The small cat was curled up in the passenger seat, wrapped in a blanket she had found in the trunk. Its paws still trembled from the cold, and its meows were faint, almost inaudible, as if it was trying to cry for help but had no strength left. Eulalia's gaze kept shifting between the road and the fragile creature beside her, her heart aching every time she saw those big, frightened eyes. She didn't know much about cats, but something inside her told her it needed help right away. Its condition was critical. What kind of person could leave such a small, helpless creature abandoned in a storm like this? Eulalia thought, feeling a mix of anger and sadness. Her past was filled with moments when life had tested her, and in that moment, she felt like she was facing yet another challenge, but this time for a life that, until now, had been completely unknown to her. When she arrived home, Eulalia hurriedly opened the door and carefully carried the small cat in her arms into the living room. Her home was simple, cozy, But at that moment it felt like a fortress of warmth and protection against the world outside. She placed the cat on a pillow near the fireplace and rushed to get towels, trying to dry it as quickly as possible. She knew it wasn't enough. The cat needed a vet. But the local veterinary clinic was closed, and the storm that raged over the town made it impossible to drive to the nearest big city. Eulalia sat down next to the cat, watching its chest rise and fall slowly, as if every breath was a battle. She whispered a quick prayer, asking for strength for the small creature. The hours dragged on that long night. Eulalia watched the cat with her heart in her throat, feeling powerless. It was as if she was reliving the same pain she had felt years ago when she lost her husband to a sudden illness. She had always believed there were things in life beyond our control, and that feeling of helplessness was consuming her again. Eulalia didn't know how, but she felt that she had to save this cat, as if it was a last attempt to rescue her own faith in life, a life that had so often seemed unfair to her. The cat, meanwhile, remained still, except for its eyes, which moved slowly, as if trying to understand where it was and who this strange woman was by its side. It wasn't used to kindness. Its body bore scars, small but deep, from a life of neglect. It was a cat that had lived on the streets, always on its own, always at the mercy of whatever fate threw its way. Its tiny heart, already weary from so much struggle, seemed to hesitate between continuing or giving up entirely. That night, while the storm howled outside, Eulalia felt a deep connection with the animal. She knew what it was like to be alone. She knew what it was like to lose everything and yet keep going. But did the small cat still have that strength? Did it have one more fight left inside? At dawn, the storm had passed, but the cold still clung to the town. Eulalia rose early, her heart heavy with worry. The cat was still there, breathing, but weak. She knew she had to act fast. She grabbed the phone and called the town vet, her old friend Marta. Marta answered with a groggy voice, but when Eulalia explained the situation, she didn't hesitate. "Bring it in now," Marta said. "I'll do what I can." Eulalia wrapped the cat in a blanket and rushed out the door, her car cutting through the morning fog. The drive seemed endless. With every turn, she glanced at the small creature in her lap, silently hoping it would hold on. When she finally arrived at the clinic, Marta was already waiting. "It's in critical condition," she said after a quick examination, "but we'll try." "You did the right thing bringing it in." The next few hours were a whirlwind of emotions. Eulalia waited in the next room, her heart in her throat. The clock on the wall seemed to move slower with each passing second. Time, which so often felt indifferent, now dragged on cruelly. Marta and her team worked carefully, trying to stabilize the cat, but the prognosis was uncertain. It had lost too much body heat, and its organs were beginning to fail. But despite the difficulties, there was still a small chance. Finally, after what felt like hours, Marta entered the room with a serious expression. "It's a fighter," she said. "It's still very weak, but it wants to live." Those words struck something deep in Eulalia. The small cat wasn't ready to give up. Like her, it had also decided to fight, even when the world seemed to want otherwise. The days that followed that morning were filled with a quiet tension. The little cat, now under Marta's intensive care, fought for its life. Eulalia, who couldn't stay away from the veterinary clinic for long, made daily visits. Each time she walked through the clinic's door, her heart raced. Marta's responses were always cautious. "It's stable but weak." Those words became a fragile mantra of hope. With time, Eulalia felt more connected to that small life than she ever could have imagined. With every visit, she brought small gestures of affection and whispered words. The cat, which still didn't have a name, slowly began to respond to her presence. Its meows, once inaudible, turned into soft purrs when Eulalia approached. Marta watched with the attentive eyes of someone who had witnessed many similar stories. "It's responding to your love, Eulalia," she would say, as if she knew there was something more between them than just a chance meeting on a stormy night. But not every day brought good news. The fragile body of the cat still showed signs of exhaustion, as if each recovery was a new battle. One of the hardest days came when Marta asked to speak with Eulalia privately. "We need to talk," she said in a serious tone. "Its fight won't be easy. It has a severe infection and is too weak for surgery right now. I'll do everything I can, but maybe it's time to think about whether it still has the strength to continue." Those words hit Eulalia like a blow. Sitting in the waiting room, her hands trembling, she stared at the door that separated the reception from the exam room. On the other side, the little cat was fighting to survive. And on this side, Eulalia felt overwhelmed by the memories that moment brought. The same helplessness she had felt beside her husband's hospital bed years ago, watching him struggle against a disease no one could defeat, came rushing back with full force. Silent tears streamed down her face as Marta's words echoed in her mind. Was she wrong to fight so hard for this little life? Would it be more merciful to let go and free it from its suffering? Eulalia knew what it was like to lose a battle with life, to watch someone slip away with nothing to be done, and that pain had left deep scars. She wondered if she was projecting her own grief onto this cat, using its fight as an escape from her own unhealed wounds. That night, in her quiet home, Eulalia reflected deeply. Her thoughts drifted between the past and the present, reliving difficult moments, like when she had held her husband's hand during his final moments. The pain of that loss still felt fresh in her heart, and now, in an unexpected way, she felt like she was facing the same choice again. But something inside her, a faint yet firm flame, told her the little cat deserved the chance to fight until the very end. The next morning, Eulalia made her decision. She walked into the clinic with renewed determination and went straight to Marta. "I know it's suffering, but I feel it still wants to fight. And if it wants to fight, I will fight with it, no matter what." Marta looked at her for a moment in silence, as if trying to understand the depth of what Eulalia was feeling. Then, she slowly nodded. "All right," she said softly, "we'll keep going." From that moment on, the battle for the cat's life became a joint mission. Eulalia, now more determined than ever, dedicated herself entirely to the animal's care. In the weeks that followed, the clinic became her second home. She brought blankets, toys, and even a small scratching post for the cat, hoping that, in time, it would regain the strength to play and move freely. Days turned into weeks, and the cat's progress, though slow, was steady. Its eyes, once dull and lifeless, began to sparkle. It started to walk with more confidence, its steps small but determined, as if it were rediscovering the will to live. Eulalia saw each little victory as a miracle. The most emotional moment came when, for the first time, the cat ate on its own, something that had seemed impossible just weeks before. It was during this period that Eulalia decided to give it a name. She looked at him, now stronger and more expressive, and said, "You're a real warrior, but I'll call you Valente." The name seemed to fit perfectly with the little creature, who had fought every day to survive and now seemed more alive than ever. Little by little, Valente began to interact more with Eulalia. He curled up in her lap, something he had never done before, and his timid displays of affection deeply touched Eulalia's heart. The bond between the two was undeniable. Eulalia no longer saw just an animal she had rescued, but a soul that, in some way, had rescued hers as well. The months that followed were a true test of perseverance for both Valente and Eulalia. Each day brought new challenges, but also unexpected victories. With each small step forward that Valente took, Eulalia's heart filled with renewed hope. He was no longer the frail, terrified cat she had found in the storm. Now, his steps were firmer, his fur was beginning to regain its shine, and his eyes reflected something that hadn't been there before: trust. Eulalia began to realize that, in some way, this shared struggle had also healed deep wounds within her. The days that had once been empty and lonely were now filled with purpose. Valente had become not only a companion but a living reminder that life always offers another chance, even in its darkest moments. The silences in her home, once heavy with sadness, were now filled with the sound of small paws walking across the wooden floor and soft purrs when Valente curled up beside her on the couch. One afternoon, While sitting with Valente on her lap, Eulalia reflected on the journey they had both traveled. The harsh winter had passed, and the first flowers of spring were beginning to bloom in Eulalia's garden. It was as if nature had been mirroring the transformation that was happening inside the house and within them. Valente's health had stabilized, and now he ran around the living room with renewed energy, playing with the toys Eulalia had brought for him. But more than his physical recovery, something deeper had changed. Valente, once just a small life struggling to survive, had become a symbol of resilience and perseverance. One morning, while watching Valente play in the garden for the first time, Eulalia remembered Marta's words at the beginning of it all, when the prognosis was uncertain. "He's a fighter," she had said. And indeed, he was. Valente's strength, even in the face of overwhelming odds, had inspired Eulalia in ways she had never expected. More than ever, she understood that animals have an extraordinary ability to teach us about life, about continuing on, even when everything seems lost. As time went on, Valente and Eulalia developed a simple but meaningful routine. He followed her around the house in all her tasks, always curious, always present. It was as if, after so long living in abandonment, Valente had discovered what it meant to have a home, and Eulalia, what it meant to have family again. Sometimes, on the quieter nights, Eulalia found herself talking to him, sharing stories and thoughts, as if he could understand every word. And, in a way, he did. Valente's gaze, always attentive and loving, seemed to say that he knew exactly what she was feeling. One day, after returning from a routine checkup at the vet, Marta looked at Valente and smiled with satisfaction. "He's completely recovered," she said, with a sparkle in her eyes. "I never thought he would recover so well after everything he went through." Eulalia felt a deep sense of relief. She knew the road had been hard, but at that moment, the weight of all the uncertainty finally lifted. Marta, who had known Eulalia for many years, paused before continuing. "You know, I've always thought that this cat came into your life for a greater reason than you realize. I've seen you transform along with him." Eulalia smiled. That was true. Valente had been more than a rescue. He had brought back her faith in life, something she had long believed was lost. The days were now filled with more joy. Valente was strong and healthy, and his energy was contagious. He ran through the house's hallways, jumping from one place to another, as if celebrating each new day. Eulalia, who once carried the pain of the past like a constant burden, felt lighter. Valente's presence reminded her every day that life can be full of surprises and that sometimes the most valuable things come from the most unexpected moments. Eulalia began to open her heart to new possibilities. The small house that had once been marked by silence was now a refuge of joy, and she even started to consider adopting another animal to keep Valente company. The love she had rediscovered while caring for that little feline made her realize that there was much more inside her that could still be shared. One afternoon, as the two of them rested in the backyard, Valente lying beside Eulalia, the sun gently shining through the trees, she realized something. That little cat had healed more than just his own body. He had healed Eulalia's soul, something she had never thought possible when she found him, fragile and on the brink of death, that stormy night. Eulalia looked at Valente, who was peacefully napping next to her, and whispered, "Thank you for not giving up." And in the quiet of that afternoon, the wind seemed to carry her gratitude in all directions, as if the universe itself was witnessing their story of survival and love. As time went on, Eulalia realized that her story with Valente had grown into something far more profound than she could have imagined. What had started as a simple act of compassion, stopping to rescue a fragile life on the side of a desolate road, became a transformative journey of love, healing, and resilience. Valente, the small, abandoned cat, was no longer just a memory of that stormy night. He had become a constant reminder of life's unpredictable beauty and the strength found in the most fragile moments. Eulalia often reflected on the parallels between her life and Valente's struggle. For so long, she had carried the weight of grief and loss, particularly after her husband's passing, which had left a void in her life that she feared would never be filled. Loneliness had become a quiet companion, and the days had begun to blur together in a haze of routine and solitude. But then, in the midst of a storm, a small, broken creature had entered her world, and everything began to change. Valente's fight for survival was a mirror to Eulalia's own internal battle. Her need to rediscover hope and her belief in the possibility of new beginnings, even after great loss. As she cared for him, tending to his wounds, watching him slowly regain his strength, she realized that she, too, was healing. The act of saving Valente was also an act of saving herself, of reclaiming her sense of purpose and connection to the world around her. In those quiet moments, when Valente would curl up beside her, purring softly as if to say thank you in his own way, Eulalia felt a warmth in her heart that had long been absent. She had learned that love often arrives in unexpected forms, and that sometimes it takes a small, resilient creature to remind us of our own capacity to endure. Through Valente, she had found a kind of companionship she hadn't known she needed, and that companionship had breathed new life into her days. But more than anything, Valente's journey reminded Eulalia of the importance of not giving up. Even when the world feels overwhelming, even when the storms seem too fierce to weather, there is always a reason to hold on. Valente had fought against impossible odds, and in doing so, he had shown Eulalia that perseverance is its own kind of victory. It isn't always about winning or losing, it's about the decision to keep going, to keep hoping, and to keep believing that something better is just around the corner. As she watched Valente play in the garden, his fur glistening in the sunlight, Eulalia marveled at the transformation that had taken place. He was no longer the weak, shivering kitten she had found on that stormy night. Now, he was strong, full of life, and eager to explore the world around him. And in his recovery, Eulalia saw the reflection of her own healing. Marta had been right. Valente had come into her life for a reason. He had taught her that love doesn't always come when we expect it, but when we need it the most. He had shown her that even the most broken souls can find their way back to wholeness with a little bit of kindness, patience, and care. And most of all, he had reminded her that life, no matter how difficult or unpredictable, is always worth fighting for. Eulalia looked down at Valente, now curled up at her feet, and felt a deep sense of gratitude. She had saved him from the storm, but in the process, he had saved her too. He had pulled her out of the depths of her own sorrow, reminding her that life was still full of moments worth cherishing. Valente's story is one that resonates deeply with all of us. It's a reminder that, no matter how difficult our journey may be, there is always hope on the horizon. It teaches us that love and compassion have the power to heal even the deepest wounds, and that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can change everything. So, as we reflect on Valente's journey, we are reminded to face our own storms with courage. Because somewhere, even in the darkest times, there is always a chance for redemption, for healing, and for love to enter our lives when we least expect it. And just like Valente, we all have the strength to keep fighting for those brighter days ahead.